Great. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're excited to be to have this program and have people joining us both from our local area and some people from further away. And I do have everybody muted, as I said, because it's a large group. We will have a time for questions and comments. And I'll ask you to put, feel free to use the chat to chat with each other in the meantime, or put any questions that you have for the panelists into the chat. If you're not able to use your chat, there'll be a time in the Q&A when there'll be an opportunity to unmute if you need to do that. And one little piece of housekeeping, I'm going to help us collect some information about our audience. I'm going to launch a very brief poll, which is going to show up on your screen. And it's just going to ask you 3 questions for some demographic information. If you're able to respond to it on the screen, please do that. And if you're not, I will send you a link later on. So here comes the poll. Thank you all for helping us out with that. Kind of cool to get the real-time results. Yeah. And while you're working on that, I'm going to ask Lance Goldberg, president of the Historical Society, to a word of welcome.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. This is so exciting to have so many people joining us for the history of West Hartford, maybe part 1, growing up in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. I'm very excited that we're co-sponsoring this with the Noah Webster House and the West Hartford Historical Society. And just welcome from the Jewish Historical Society. I see a lot of members that are with us, and a lot of our guests and a lot of our board members. Please consider supporting our programming and our events like these that we put on tonight. And we're just committed to telling the stories of the Jewish community of Central Connecticut. This is our 51st year that we've been around, and we plan to be around for a very, very long time to continue to tell these stories. So thanks so much for joining us. I grew up in West Hartford. I spent most of my life in West Hartford. I still live in West Hartford, and I'm very excited to hear the panel tonight. So thanks again for joining us, and Beth, thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen for a few minutes and just talk a little bit about the what we're addressing in the program tonight, and that'll provide a little bit of context for what the panelists are going to share with us and what we can talk about later. So still admitting people to the room. So growing up in West Hartford, we're focusing on the 1940s and 1950s, which was a time period when Jewish families were starting to move from Hartford into the suburbs and into West Hartford in significant numbers, but it was still the center of Jewish life was really still in the city of Hartford, and West Hartford had not yet become the center of gravity, if you will, of the Jewish community that it would become later. And I'm drawing in just a couple of things I'm going to talk about right now. I'm drawing on the work of a few different people. So I want to acknowledge Betty Hoffman's book, Jewish West Hartford from City to Suburb, and also Tracy Wilson, who I think is here with us tonight, our town historian. He's done a lot of research that I'll be mentioning as well. So I wanted to thank them for doing that work. So we know that Jewish families started to move to West Hartford in the 1920s and 1930s. And as some were starting to leave Hartford's North End, some started businesses in West Hartford, and the movement was more along the from the west end of Hartford, the Farmington Avenue, and neighborhoods along there. There are a few examples drawing from Betty Hoffman's book of Frances Feldman's family moved in the 1920s because she was ill with pneumonia, and the doctor actually prescribed a move to the suburbs, where her father ran a grocery store near Park and Quaker Lane. Martin Epstein's parents bought a house on Griswold Drive near Asylum Avenue in the 1930s. Stanley Wisen's family moved also in the 1930s between Fern and Asylum, and he remembered being one of, sorry, I'm just lost my thing there, one of 9 Jewish students at Hall High School when he graduated. The first synagogue to be created in West Hartford, of course, was Beth Israel, which was dedicated in 1936, and was the first of all the Greater Hartford synagogues to build in the suburbs. Many of its members were already living in the West End of Hartford and sort of saw West Hartford as a desirable location at that time. In the 1940s and 1950s, a much larger wave of Jewish families began moving out of Hartford into West Hartford and Bloomfield after World War II. And by the early 1950s, the transformation of the farmland around Bishop's Corner into single-family homes had really taken off. And this is part of a larger development of West Hartford. So West Hartford's population during these years was growing pretty dramatically. And you see here an ad for a home in the Webster Hill area from a developer, Irving Stitch, who's one of many developers who was building in that time period. Beth David Synagogue was the next one to be created in West Hartford, and it was it was created as the originally called the West Hartford Jewish Center, and wanted to provide a Hebrew school and traditional high holiday services in town for Jews who were moving to West Hartford at that time. So they purchased a house on the corner of the Dover Road and Farmington Avenue and launched the synagogue. Oops. One. And then Beth El Temple is created in 1953 by a group of families who were at the Emmanuel, located in the north end of Hartford, who were convinced that a move to the suburbs was necessary and desirable, while other people in that synagogue wanted to stay in Hartford. So they ultimately decided to establish a new synagogue in West Hartford and built Beth El Temple, which opened in 1956, and hired Rabbi Kessler, who you see on the right there, holding the Torah. So that's just a quick overview. And I'm going to ask a series of questions for our panelists and ask them to respond kind of briefly, and then we'll proceed through that, and then we'll get to a little bit more discussion. So I'm going to start with Sandy Rolnick. Sandy, could you tell us when and why did your family come to West Hartford, if you know the why, and how would you describe the neighborhood and the neighborhoods where your family lived?
Sure. Well, I'm a product of the north end of Hartford and the south end. My father was brought up in the south end of Hartford on Jefferson Street. My grandparents owned a one-room grocery store across from Hartford Hospital. And my mother's parents were on Westbourne Parkway. My grandfather, for those of you old enough to remember, my grandfather founded the Star Silk and Woolen Company. My mother's maiden name was Novar. And we moved to West Hartford. My mother and I lived with my grandparents in Hartford for my first 2 years. Dad was overseas in the service. When he came back in 1947, my parents bought their first house, which was on Sydney Avenue. And it may be a street name that is not familiar to a lot of people. It was and still is in the Elmwood section of West Hartford. There were probably not more than 6 or 7 Jewish families in the entire area. I went to Charter Oak Elementary School, and I think there were maybe half a dozen kids in the school at any one time. Why my parents moved to that neighborhood, I really don't know. I'm sure cost had a lot to do with it. The street we were on was, I believe, new construction. We were the first owners of the house. And we were there until 1957 when my brother Jay Hirschman, my folks, and I moved to Penn Drive. And that's basically the gist of the neighborhood.
Great, thank you, Sandy. And then Paula Feinstein, could you introduce yourself a little and respond to the same question about how your family came to West Hartford? Let's see. Paula, you still there? Okay, I'm gonna skip to Dan then.
Can you hear me?
There you are. Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
Sorry.
no problem.
Yeah, I'm a long way from home. So, okay. So my parents moved to Dover Road from Gardner Street in Hartford. My father and mom bought a 2-family house. They knew that they could have somebody living upstairs or downstairs, as the case may be, and that's how they could afford it. The folks that ultimately moved downstairs were the Cohns, who were the first rabbi for Beth David. My parents were one of the 40 families that started the Beth David synagogue, and I remember very well that White House that we used to play ping pong in when we went to Hebrew school.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paula. And then Dan Kleinman, can you introduce yourself and
Sure.
Respond to that question? For us?
My name is Dan Kleinman, and I can't tell you how appreciative I am to have the opportunity to be on this panel. It has brought back so many fond memories to me, and especially since I can't remember what I had for dinner last night, to be able to relive many things that were so important to me in my life. I'm 77 years old. I live in Farmington now with my wife, Jeannie. My parents were Ruth and Harry Kleinman. My brother is Bill Kleinman, and my sister-in-law is Myra. They continued to live in West Hartford, where they are, as many of you know, very active in many religious and charitable organizations. We moved to West Hartford in 1948. My brother Bill is convinced, and I won't disabuse him of that we moved because he had just been born and my parents wanted a nice house for him. And if that's the way he believes it, then I'm okay with that. My father was very active in Hartford. He was the majority leader on the board of aldermen. He was active in politics. His law firm was there. He was active in many Jewish activities. And for him to make the move to West Hartford was a very significant thing, because he was really giving up his political connection. And that was important to him. And he thought going to West Hartford was going to be the end of his political career, but Mayor Cantor knows better and knows the impact, I think, of his life in West Hartford and politics. But I think at the end of the day, he was looking at education. He always did. He always looked at life through many different prisms, but education was extremely important to him. And I think he believed that the West Hartford public school system was going to be something very special. And the environment of West Hartford was a wonderful place for his family to live. Now, the neighborhood I lived in was a non-Jewish neighborhood. My grandfather built our house on Pilgrim Road. And that's before Pilgrim Road was extended down to Mohawk Drive. And we were the only Jewish family on the street, and it encompassed really Norwood Road, Colony Road, and Pilgrim Road. And while people were outwardly cordial, there was literally no interaction between us and our non-Jewish neighbors. We were rarely inside people's homes. And my father thought that, given the few interactions I had with some of the neighborhood bullies, that it might be a good idea if I went to Billy Taylor's boxing school. He was a tough Golden Gloves Irish boxer in the South End of Hartford. And I did go to his boxing school, and I learned a lot. And needless to say, I had a couple of interactions, and I was able to put my training to good use, and all that stopped. So the neighborhood has changed dramatically from where we first encountered it.
Great, thank you. Susan Goldberg?
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. I want to say hello to everybody and thank you for the opportunity. My folks were Sylvia and Paul Koch. So when, and I actually just recently talked to Pat Koch Thaler, so I am related. We have verified it to the mayor of New York. But more than that, the president of the Jewish Historical Society, I'm very proud to say, is Lance, son of myself and my husband, Paul. So that's pretty special. And I saw that online, both of our other sons are here also. So David is here from Jamaica Plain, and Jeremy is here from Columbus, Ohio. So welcome, guys. So I moved to West Hartford. I grew up in New York. I was born in Brooklyn in the Crown Heights area. And then we moved out to Bell Harbor, which is Rockaway. It was a wonderful place to grow up. I was a member of the Bethel Temple there with Rabbi Gordis. It was a fabulous place. But my father, I had a floor covering store in Brooklyn with my grandfather and uncles. And my father really wanted to have his own business venture. So cousins who owned, does anybody remember, you don't have to answer, Myrtle Mills in Unionville, which was a discount store. The uncles who owned that store approached my father to, they needed a floor covering department. And sure enough, my father had the wonderful experience of owning a floor covering store. And that's why we moved to Connecticut. Well, they told us, the cousin who lived here said, well, you can't live in Farmington or Unionville, at least at that time, Dan. But they said West Hartford was the place to live. Great education, the schools were excellent, and it had a wonderful Jewish community. So we moved as a family, my father, my mother, my sister, and myself, in December of 1956 to Miamis Road, which was right off Albany Avenue in the King Philip neighborhood. And Dan, it's very interesting how you describe Pilgrim Road, because we were just a few streets down from Pilgrim Road, and practically, I would say the whole street was Jewish. So it was a totally different experience that we had. My parents became best friends with the neighbors who were all Jewish. And at that time, they all belonged to the Emmanuel. So there was no question in my parents' mind that that's where we would join. And certainly we did. And it was just a wonderful place to grow up, but we'll talk more about that.
Great, thank you, Susan. So our second question, and again, we're going to go in the same order. So I'll ask Sandy to respond next. Where did you go to school and what were your experiences there? Did you have mostly Jewish or non-Jewish friends at school or in your neighborhood?
I started out at Charter Oak Elementary School, which is right, it's actually part of Sterling Field. And I had no Jewish friends at all. I really, other than spending Jewish holidays at my grandparents' house and whatnot, I really didn't have any contact with the Jewish community. We did join the Emmanuel Synagogue for a year, and I did make a friend there. And I don't know if she remembers, but she's on this tonight, and that's Susan Namaro. She was Susan Robbins. And we eventually, when we moved to Penn Drive, we moved a block away from her. But she was really the only Jewish person of my age that I knew. It wasn't until we moved to Penn Drive that, I should say, while we were on Sydney Avenue, we did belong to the Beth David, and I was enrolled in the school program there. But coming from one neighborhood to a synagogue in another neighborhood, I had no interaction the rest of the week with other elementary school children, and I did drop out. So it really wasn't until we moved to Penn Drive, and then I had only Jewish friends and became involved with being Jewish, so to speak.
Thank you, Sandy. So go to Paula next to talk about school experiences.
So we lived on Dover Road That was the only place I knew. There was only Italians and Jews on Dover Road. That was the neighborhood. The Platties lived next door, but right down the road from them were the Blooms, and on and on. It went Italian, Jewish, all the way down. And many of the people that I knew that were Jewish in school came from that neighborhood. And we belonged to Beth David. My parents were very active. My mother was president of the sisterhood. My father eventually became president of the synagogue. My aunts and uncles were there. My cousins were there. But when I went to school in the early 40s, actually the later 40s also, there was always tests on high holiday. That
Hello, honey
seemed
bunny.
to-
Sorry, go on, Paula.
Well,
Okay,
those are all berries. What?
so,
Oh, but
Interrupted by the sound of walkbacks.
Can I ask everybody to mute it,
just
please?
about the West Hartford Jewish community.
Okay, where is it? What is it?
It's a Zoom from the Jewish Historical Society.
All right, so we'll watch it here.
Yeah,
okay, so,
I'm gonna put this in the refrigerator.
yeah, I think whoever is speaking, can you mute, please? Thank you. So, I knew only Italians and Jews. That was my upbringing when I went to Hall High School. Hall High School had Italians and Jews. That's, I would say, the experience that I had, although the experience was that Christmas was celebrated, but there was no Jewish holidays that were recognized. It was really not a Jewish environment. Only in that immediate area right next to Beth David did we know Jews, and we did not really socialize with the Italians except at school. So I remember liking this boy named Joey Casarino. And when I brought home my his ring, I thought my parents were going to have a heart attack, literally. So that even though we did know the Italian neighbors, we really stuck to our own.
Thank you, Paula. Dan, would you like to comment on your school experiences?
I think I, like others who went to King Philip, may have traveled the nomad path that I did. And that was, I started at the Beach Park School for my first, I guess it was kindergarten and first grade. And then I headed over to the Duffy School, which was as far south as you could get. No Jews there, but they bussed us from Pilgrim Road to the Duffy School. I made a lot of friends at school, but no social friends, really. We were never in anybody's homes. We were never invited to birthday parties. And from then we got bused closer to our neighborhood, and we ended up at the Bugby School. And that was quite a nice experience. There were a few Jewish kids who were there. And then Let There Be Light. King Philip was then opened, and went to King Philip Elementary School, 5th and 6th grade, where I met all kinds of Jewish friends, many of whom were at Bethel, where I was a student, and then went to King Philip Junior High School, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. At that point, it was a 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, and then I went to prep school, boarding school in Massachusetts, where I was one of maybe a minion of Jewish kids there, and it was the first opportunity I had to really socialize with non-Jews. And it was eye-opening, illuminating. It was helpful for me to meet non-Jews and be treated as an equal. But I really made most of my friends at King Philip, Jewish friends, and Bethel Temple, where I went to Hebrew school. And we had so many shared common interests together that it was the most enjoyable part of my school education in those young years.
Great, thank you, Dan. Susan, would you like to comment on your school?
Absolutely.
memories?
So again, I moved from New York to West Hartford, and I was in 6th grade. And my teacher at that time, many of you may remember him or know him, Alan Porter, and it was his first year of teaching. And it was such a different experience being in King Philip in West Hartford from my New York school. The New York school, no grass, just concrete, 3 stories high. King Philip, of course, you all know, has so much grass. It has ball fields, a sprawling building, and a gym. And for me, it was totally different. Gym in New York, you would wear your clothes, you would go in and you didn't do much. We had to change our clothes. We had to take showers. I mean, it was such a contrast. It really was so, so different. More than that, though, in New York, I had a female teacher and a male principal. In West Hartford, I had a male teacher, Alan Porter, and a female principal. And she was Elizabeth Wren, who then became Elizabeth Wren Richter. In West Hartford, we sat in groups around a table, not in rows. And we even made presentations to class with 1 or 2 others. So different. One interesting memory from 6th grade, many of us took dancing lessons at Beach Park Elementary School on Steel Road. We were taught how to slow dance first and then fast dancing as well. And we even had to wear white gloves when we were doing that. Can you imagine the kids today taking dancing lessons? I don't know that I could. King Philip Elementary was predominantly Jewish. That was the elementary. And I remember the few non-Jews would take the high holidays off and either stay home or come with us to synagogue on one of the days. From King Philip Elementary, I went to King Philip Junior High School, which of course was right next door. And that drew from several elementary schools. So there were more non-Jews present at the junior high school as opposed to the elementary. And our non-Jewish friends loved going to the bar and bat mitzvahs. And they really enjoyed coming. And their conduct at the synagogue was so excellent because they were accustomed to going to church where they didn't dare say anything, unlike maybe some of the Jewish kids. My close friends were Jewish, but I also was very friendly with kids. My kids did things on their own. We had Hebrew school, but we also were able to take the Albany Avenue bus downtown. We took the bus, I took the bus to the West Library, but didn't drive at the time. There were no organized after-school sports for the girls, just for the boys. So high school came, and that was a real change because we went to Conard High School. Incredible difference. We were bused, of course, the new school were those who lived in walking distance. So they bused us from the King Philip area all the way. And all of a sudden, Jews were in the minority there, and it was very different. It was a huge culture shock. Conard was also challenging for me to be able to make friends with some of the non-Jewish girls in my classes, but there was no direct way to get home. So it was difficult. It's very interesting because in the last, 15, 20 years, I've met up with some of my non-Jewish Conard friends who've become my friends. We've been working on class reunions, and that's been very special. So we shared a lot in school, but we weren't friends. And now we are in doing the reunions. So that's been a very, very nice thing for me.
Great, thank you, Susan. Coming back to Sandy for our third question is about what role did being Jewish play in your life while you were growing up?
Well, as I said before, I didn't have much of a Jewish experience for the first dozen years or so until we did move to Penn Drive. But I do remember being a child on Sydney Avenue. I felt special being Jewish. Why? I honestly don't know. Maybe it was because I got to take some more days off for holidays. I have no clue whatsoever. But once we moved to Penn Drive, as I said before, I had really nothing but Jewish friends, and I became more aware of my Jewishness. I joined the youth group at Beth David. There were youth group dances, more activities. I would go to services occasionally on a Saturday at Beth David. Now, whether it was because I wanted to attend services or I wanted to see some of the cute neighborhood boys who were going, I couldn't tell you, but I suspect I really know what the truth is. And I just got involved knowing about myself and a little bit more about what being Jewish was all about. And I learned really from the friends that I made in the neighborhood and through school.
Great, thank you, Sandy. Paula, would you like to address that question about what role being Jewish played in your life when you're growing up?
Sure. I mentioned that Rabbi Cohn lived downstairs from us for many years, and I grew up with their two children, Deborah and David. And of course, they were very Orthodox. So they had Shabbos goys, and they also, since we were up and downstairs in each other's homes all the time, there was a little disconnect because my parents worked on Shabbat, and so my brother and I would go downstairs for Shabbat and would have it with Rabbi Cohn, and my father eventually, when he retired, became Shomer Shabbos also. So Jewishness obviously was a major part of our lives growing up. And the only other thing I can say is that when we went to Hall High, we did not go to Conard. And in Hall High, we were definitely in the minority. But we never felt really that we were the other. We always were part of. And my brother, who was very involved in the jazz group that was originally started, and the jazz group was a mix of Jewish and non-Jewish boys, and they would come to our home and practice. That was when they first got started way back when. And so our experience, I think, growing up was very Jewish, but also very integrated into the larger community.
Thank you, Paula. Dan, would you like to address that question about the role
Sure.
of being Jewish in your life at that time?
So my parents had a saying that they consistently reinforced, and that was, if you don't respect your religion, then none of your non-Jewish friends will respect it. And so our life, my brothers and mine, really were built around observance of Judaism. My parents were founding members of Bethel. They were both presidents of the Temple, of the Sisterhood, active in the Federation, strong supporters of Israel, all of which they wanted my brother and me to understand and to follow if possible. And as a result, if I wanted to go to a party on Friday night, there was no question I couldn't go. If I didn't want to go to temple, then I could stay home. And that was kind of the way that our family worked in terms of observance and the importance of Judaism. And in addition, they taught us the values of tikkun olam, of charitable giving, of service to the community. My brother and I both went to Camp Ramah. And all of that has served for me as kind of a moral compass, and that's Judaism itself and what it taught me and the lessons that my parents tried to instill in us. And I'm sure that I fell short from time to time, perhaps on what I should be doing, but I've always cherished what I learned and what their example was as I live my life. And I've tried to explain that not only to my children, but to my grandchildren at the time they were bar and bat mitzvah, in terms of carrying forth the legacy of Judaism and how important it is.
Thank you, Dan. Susan?
Being Jewish has been a major part of my life. Even in New York, when I was young, I would walk to junior congregations. It wasn't because I was so religious, but there were other kids there. It was interesting. It was fun. I really enjoyed it. When we moved to Connecticut, the Emmanuel was just so important for me and really affected me. Friday night services in Hartford. So any of you from Hartford, whether you were Emmanuel members or not, I'm sure you all remember there were hundreds of people there at services and teenagers. Oh my goodness, the place was just full of teenagers. It was really significant for me. It was so much fun. It was just, I had started to go to Jewish camp. My first experience was in the Berkshires at Camp Watito. But then my teachers at the Emmanuel told me about Ramah, and I met some people who had been to Ramah. So Camp Ramah became a major influence on my life. The people that I met, the Shabbat experiences that I had, and that carries through to me today with dear friends in different parts of the country and different holidays that we make, and just even family things. Paul and I have been building a sukkah for years. And it's not because it's just we're so religious, but again, it's just a fun family kind of activity. And we love having the family, and especially the grandchildren now, enjoy it with us. But back to the synagogue and how important it was, the Israeli dancing, the socializing, two very special teachers that I had that really had an influence on me at the Emmanuel, Frida Clark Hyman and Neil Macy. And they both influenced me in totally different ways. Family seders were very important, but it was really my Ramah and my Jewish youth group friends who played a huge part in my life. My grandfather also was a tremendous Zionist, and also would always encourage me when I met people to find out where they were from. And so when I went to something at the University of Hartford and Avi Pot was speaking, and it was about Holocaust. And I guess I went up to him afterwards and I said, Avi, thank you for doing this. And by the way, my grandfather would want to know where you're from. And Avi said, well, I'm from a town in Austria-Hungary called Haradenka. And guess what? Haradenka, that's where we're from. So my grandfather never would have met his family because his family immigrated from Haradenka directly to Israel, whereas my family, of course, immigrated here. So, you never know what influences a kid, but I always remembered, I would always, and I still ask people, where are they from? So it's important to think about what influences people and the impact that different relatives might have on you, and now on your children, and of course, for many of us, on our grandchildren. So it's important to think in those terms.
Thank you so much. A couple of you have touched on this question already, but if we want to go to see if you wanted to add anything else about being part of a synagogue or other Jewish organization like Jewish Youth Group while living in West Hartford, and what that meant to you. Sandy, do you want to add anything to what you said already about that?
Well, most of the organizations that I became involved with were really as a young adult after high school, not so much during high school, other than the youth group. That was pretty much it for the most part.
Great, thank you. And Paula, you've spoken a little bit about about Beth David and the rabbi and so on. Did you want to add anything to that?
I do want to say that I was very Jewish until I went to college, and in college I realized that I was gay, and that coming from an Orthodox background, that combination just wasn't going to hack it. So for a long time I left the Jewish religion and became a Zen Buddhist, which is not something that is actually they're very compatible. But it wasn't until I met my partner, which was 30 some odd years ago, and she's gay and Jewish, and very Jewish actually. And so she kind of brought me back into the fold. And of course, the Jewish religion has changed dramatically and is very now accepting of gay people. But when I came out in my early 20s, certainly that there was no room, if you will, for a gay person in at least Orthodox Judaism. So now I'm a member of Paneor, which is how I got to be on this panel, because I met Beth. And I want to say that Judaism, again, is a very much part of my life. I'm on the board, and certainly we're very Jewish, which is something that I've always enjoyed, and I'm glad I was able to return to it.
Thank you so much, Paula. Dan, would you like to say anything more about your family's involvement with Bethel and what that meant to you?
I will just say a couple of things, and this probably resonates with many people on the call. I see many friends and Bethel members. I was privileged at my age to be part of building Bethel really from the ground up. The meetings to form Bethel took place in our living room. In 1953, my father was involved in buying the 10 acres of land that created a Bethel. And when the building was built, it was built through the efforts of a lot of volunteers. And I remember Simon Conover, may he rest in peace, on his hands and knees in the vestry, which was our sanctuary, laying tile. And young people who were my age, 10, 9, 10, 11, 12, were all there. Everybody pitched in to build that building. And every time I walk into Bethel, I am flooded with the memories of what it took for the community that formed Bethel to build Bethel, and what it's become today, and how wonderful it is. And really the importance to me is that it taught me what was important about Judaism, the values of Judaism, and religious observance. And there are plenty of people much more religious and more observant than me, but it gave me a moral compass in terms of how I wanted to conduct my life and live my life, and the values that I have, and the enduring friendships I had, one of whom was Beverly Parks Greenberg, whose mother made the best chocolate chip cookies I ever ate. And when I would ride my bike home from King Philip with David Parks, we would stop at the Parks' home, and Beverly was always there. And she was 4 years older, but always with a kind word, and a wonderful person. And she and Arnold were pillars of Bethel. And I was so saddened to read of her death today. I'm in Florida and can't attend the funeral, but may her memory be for a blessing, one of a kind, and another product of Bethel Temple. So I love Bethel, and Bethel did so much for me, and it's why I try to give back to Bethel as much as I can in my later years.
Wonderful, thank you, Dan. Susan, I know you've just spoken a little bit about the Emmanuel. Is there anything that you wanted to add to that?
I want to add a few more things. And Dan, what you just said about Bethel, you had shared with me when we talked last week, something that someone else had told me, but you really
Susan, we're having a little trouble hearing you right now.
Paul, do you want to go off the computer? I'm sorry, give me 1 minute. Okay, so Dan corroborated the story that I had heard, that when Rabbi, I guess some of the folks who wanted to start Bethel came to Rabbi Silverman saying we wanted to start a synagogue in Bethel, in West Hartford, and I think you had said, and would you want to start this, Rabbi Silverman? And Rabbi Silverman, apparently, according to the story and to you, said, you have my blessing. That's a wonderful idea. Go and do it. And so for me, that shows the spirit of cooperation and feeling that we're all one people. And I like that. I like that a lot. Something else about the Jewish community, Paul and I have remained friends with Howard Cherish, who used to be a leader in Federation. And Howard had been in federations all over this country. And he told us how special the Hartford Jewish community is. And I really feel that. But the point that I want to make now about synagogue organizations, for me, yes, Ramah was incredible, but also I was in Jewish youth groups. So USY was good, but I was in something called LTF, Leaders Training Fellowship. It was kind of more of a study thing and a service thing. And yes, we did have social activities and we went away on weekends. And so what I really want to share with you is whether it's your children or your grandchildren, there's so many competitions for kids to do things today. If it's at all possible, encourage them to do Jewish. USY is still alive and well. There's other Jewish organizations. For me, going to Bridgeport or New Haven for a Kines or a Kala was magical, was wonderful. I was with Jewish kids. Yes, we had study sessions, but we also had fun. And it was clean fun. It was good fun. And all I say is encourage the kids and grandkids. You know, it doesn't hurt for a grandparent to say, this is a good thing to do. So they were enormous influences on me. They still exist. And I think it's really, really important. The other big thing for me is Ramah I was fortunate in the my junior year. The summer of my junior year was the first year that Camp Ramah had a trip to Israel, and that was in 1962. And it was an incredible experience. So that's something else that, you know, what influences, what importance do these things have? A lot of importance. At that time, Ramah tried to be totally in Hebrew. So I brought my guidebook in English because I certainly wasn't fluent enough in Hebrew. But the point is, these are fabulous experiences. And, you know, I talk to grandparents and they say, oh, we're taking the kids here, we're taking the kids there. Israel or Jewish places makes so much sense. When Paul and I travel, and you know, we've been all over Europe and we've done so much travel. And on Friday nights, we always try to go to a Masorti or a conservative synagogue for service. Again, not because we're so religious, but it's just so wonderful to connect with Jewish people all over. So I really have to say that the Jewish experiences that I've had here in Hartford, in West Hartford, have been so special for me. And with my husband, Paul, and our sons, West Hartford has been just an amazing place to grow up. And the Jewish life I've experienced here has enriched me tremendously. So I'm very grateful for all of it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So we have a little time now for questions or comments from the audience. I'd invite you to put anything into the chat if you can access the chat. And I'd see that Harriet Samuels has had her hand up for a little while. Harriet, would you like to unmute and speak up?
Thank you. I was brought up in West Hartford on Middlebrook Road, corner of Ballard, and Rabbi Feldman lived just down the street. My grandparents actually helped start Congregation Beth Israel. And I was the first child named at the synagogue, which is now on Farmington Avenue. But the point of going to camp is very important. The Reform movement has what is called NEFTY, New England Federation of Temple Youth. And that was a wonderful experience. I remember going the first time and coming back, we got off the bus and we stood around the front of the building. As you know, there's like a plaza there. And we were dancing Israeli dances and we were just whooping it up. But there was something else that needs to be pointed out about West Hartford. I don't know this for a fact because I was too young to understand at the time. But I remember my mother being told that when she was looking to buy a home in West Hartford, she was with a realtor and they went to Elizabeth Park and they sat down and he went over his listings. And she said, gee, sounds like a very nice home. It's on the pond. And he said, Mrs. Samuels, I can't show that to you. Jews aren't allowed. There has always been, and I can cite other examples, a good deal of anti-Semitism and resentment of the Jewish people in West Hartford. It's not something that is dead. It's very much alive and well. I do not live in West Hartford anymore. I live in Boynton Beach. But I remember several incidents when I was growing up in elementary school, Morley, in junior high, in high school, when they had Project Concern, tremendous amount of anti-Semitism. And I think that's a very important thing for us to remember.
Absolutely. Thank you, Harriet. I'm gonna, Susan, you want to respond to that briefly?
Harriet, thank you for mentioning that, but I'm proud to say, so first of all, my family moved here in 1956 from the beach in New York, and my mother asked her, are there any lakes or is there something that we can move to? And the realtor said, oh, Mrs. Koch, you'd be so much happier on the other side of town where the temples are. Okay, fast forward from 1956 to 1997, I wanted to live on water and I wanted to live on a lake. And I knew that Wood Pond was here and Waterside Lane and Woodridge Lake. And so Paul and I started looking for a house and we found one. And I have to tell you, Harriet, it has changed dramatically. 25%, if not more, of the population here is now Jewish. I know it had been a restricted community. All of those restricted words are out of the covenant of our lake association. So I'm really happy to tell you that. Plus, Paul and I build a sukkah every year for Sukkot. And the first year when we did that, and people would row their boats by because the lake is in my backyard, they would say, hi, Susan, hi, Paul, what are you building? What is that? And try and explain it on one foot, right? But what we decided to do was to invite the neighbors, the non-Jewish neighbors, and explain what it is. Well, that was what, 25 years ago. Now, over the years, many of these people have been calling me, Susan, my son is getting married to a Jewish woman. What do I do for this? What do I do for that? So I'm happy to say, I'm sure there's still anti-Semitism. Unfortunately, it still exists, but I'm happy to say that this neighborhood has really, really, really changed. And so 25% of our members are Jewish. So I just thought I'd share that with you.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that. My point is this, and I realize there have been very big changes. Don't take the fact that there have been big changes to forget that there's still anti-Semitism in West Hartford, in Connecticut, and in the world.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you are correct, Harriet. Unfortunately, that is the truth. I agree with you.
Thank you very much. Nancy Coker has her hand up. Would you like to?
Yes, hi. My name is Nancy Parsons Coker. I grew up in West Hartford. I was born in 1949. I now live in New Jersey, where I'm calling from. I have somewhat of a different background in that my father was Jewish. My mother was not. She was Italian, for one of you mentioned, which was a very rare union when they married in 1944. And at that time, there wasn't intermarriage, and I remember growing up, and there were no others like me mixed at the time. Now it's very, very common. But my father and his father were in real estate, and they had a real estate business that was based on Church Street called Parsons Real Estate. Some of you may remember have heard of it, but they did not sell in West Hartford. It was mostly in Hartford area. and East Hartford and so forth. But the interesting thing is that when we bought the house, my parents bought the house in 1952 on Garfield Road, which is near Sedgwick. And those were the places where Jews were not allowed to buy, period. And in fact, the first house they bought was on Belanger Avenue, which was down right at the Hartford town city line. But the second house on Garfield, where I grew up in 1952, they actually, even though my father was in real estate, they had to buy the house in the name of a Gentile friend. And it was like that, and then quietly transferred over several years later to his name. It wasn't even in my mother's name because she could have gone away, but by association and the whole thing. So it was done very quietly. And the same thing happened. My father's best childhood friend, he grew up in Westbourne Parkway for the most part after being born in Market Street. But his best friend was Milton Fleisch, who some of you may recall was a pediatrician in Hartford on Garden Street. And at the end of his life, on South Main Street, he bought on Sulgrave, and the same thing happened there. They bought at the same time. There were and it had to be bought in the name of a Gentile and then quietly transferred. Now, there weren't race restrictive covenants at that time, but it was just not done. And that sales happened like that. And in fact, I was told as a young child, and I remember being rather confused about it as a very young child, that if people asked what my father was to say I didn't know, even though I knew full well. And I never could quite understand that. And of course, I came to understand it very well, what it all meant. There were at that time, I started school at Sedgwick, and then went over, they were building schools madly. It was at Sedgwick for elementary, then went over to the Brayburn, and then went back to Sedgwick, then went back to Duffy, and then Sedgwick for junior high. And in all those schools at the time, there were effectively no Jews that I could recall. There was Jonathan Stolzenberg, who became a doctor, who still lives in West Hartford now, and the Kramer family, but they weren't, they were kind of, but it wasn't until Hall High School when Plant fed into Hall and half of Sedgwick went. So it became a different story. But in that side of town, there were no Jews at all. And the reason was simply because you could not buy. And even it's quite an amazing situation. So I understand, Harriet, when you you presented your story of what happened, it was very, very, very real. So
absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Nancy. I think it's a very important part of this history and what this, Jewish families that were coming to West Hartford in that time did have to navigate one way or the other, wherever they ended up. I don't know if any of the other panelists want to react to that at all, or if we have other questions. Paula, yeah, go ahead.
I'll just say that I worked in Travelers, and it was unheard of for a Jew to get a job in Travelers when I was growing up. In fact, it was unheard of for Jews to work in the insurance company, not just Travelers. And that I got this job was like a time of great celebration, which is because it was such a unique thing for a Jew to be hired at that point. But things have changed dramatically. I have not lived in West Hartford my whole life. I left it when I was 18 and came back. I guess it's about 8 years ago now. And the difference between growing up and the town now is totally dramatic. Very accepting, very open, very Jewish, incredibly Jewish. So there's a lot of things that have changed about West Hartford over the years.
Great, thank you so much. People have other questions or comments or things they wanted to
say one thing.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, who was trying to speak? I can't see.
Dan Fine.
Go
Oh.
ahead, Dan.
I just
Hi,
wanted
Dan.
to mention that Barney Flaxman was the treasurer of the Hartford Fire Insurance Company for many, many years. And he was the one Jew who made it big there.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up.
Beth,
Yes,
can I say something?
you can. Go ahead, David.
Hi,
Yeah.
hi, David Silver here. This is a fascinating discussion, and I want to react to what Harriet said 5 minutes ago. I was actually in Florida, very close to Boynton last week. I'm not from here originally, and I've lived here for a while now, and it's like so many. I'm so grateful at the community that we found, and it's just wonderful, etc. And I do find it interesting that, and this is a great thing, that in this current wave of anti-Semitism, we shouldn't say it too loudly, I don't think any of us have felt too much here in the last couple of years. At the same time, I must say that I've always felt there's a very subtle kind of anti-Semitism here. It's not overt, not in terms of overt acts, but very subtle things. I'd be happy to cite examples, but it's an interesting contrast. I almost feel like, if there's interest, we could have another session on anti-Semitism in Connecticut and how it may differ from what's being experienced in New York, for instance, where I just read this morning, just this month is like a 400% increase in incidents. I mean, it's really terrible what's going on there. And I think a lot of people are unaware of that. So I just wanted to say that, but we're all grateful for the great community that we have. And it's interesting to hear perspectives of people who did grow up here. Anyway, thank you.
David. Yeah. Susan?
Elizabeth, so I just want to respond to that, saying the Synagogues Federation is sponsoring all kinds of security updates for buildings. So I
Right.
think we should feel very comfortable or rest on our laurels about anything. We should take the security training very seriously and support it from our synagogues and federations and all of the important institutions. So it's a serious matter.
Absolutely. I agree 100%.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who hasn't had a chance to speak
Yes.
yet that wanted to ask a question or share something?
Can I say, it's Barbara.
Oh.
First of all, my maiden name was Barbara Gross. So it's nice to see Miss Susie Namaro there and Dan Fine. But I grew up in West Hartford. I now live in Atlanta, which is basically West Hartford South, because there's so many West Hartford people in Atlanta, from Sculder's Restaurant to, it's amazing. We all find each other. But I went to Oxford, and if you want to know about anti-Semitism and not being allowed to go to things, there were 3 Jewish girls in my class. It was Tina Schulman and Rena Koopman, and for a while, Mary Jane Weinberg, and that was it. And that certainly has changed. And I am now the go-to person for everybody whose kid has married someone Jewish. It's really funny.
Yeah.
You and Susan both. Thank you.
May I make a
Thank you.
statement?
May I just
Hi,
add
Alan.
to that, please? Loomis Chafee, the girls' part was restricted to 2 Jewish people each year.
Mhm.
Thank you. So that adds to our discussion about different school experiences. Absolutely. There's more than just the public schools going on here.
And Mount Sinai Hospital was born because Jews were not Jewish doctors weren't accepted at the other hospitals,
How do I do it?
particularly West Hartford Hospital.
Correct.
That
Yes.
started to change in the 50s and 60s also.
Right. Yeah. So what we're talking about this time period is a period where there's some different changes going on. That's important. Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Ruth, did you have your hand up? Can you unmute?
I have my hand up.
Huh.
No, okay.
I'm Mike Schulman. I have my hand up. Can
Go
you hear me?
ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm curious. I didn't hear a lot of talk about anti-Semitism with other students who are my age. You know, I heard about the restricted neighborhoods and all that, but I grew up on Brewster Road, right in the reservation. Everything I knew was Jewish. My neighborhoods, my synagogue was the Emmanuel's down the road. When there was, Jewish holidays, there were, 4 kids that actually went to school.
Right.
Between 6th and 7th grade, we moved to another neighborhood. And that at that time, that was the border between 6th and 7th. 6th was your last year in elementary school, 7th was your first year in junior high school. We moved to a whole new neighborhood where I didn't even know a soul. And the anti-Semitism was rampant from the other kids. I couldn't go anywhere a day without being called a stinking Jew, or somebody throwing a penny on the ground. Hey, Jew, you pick it up. And these were from wealthy kids. My junior high school had a substantial number of working class Italian and very few, some Irish, a lot of Catholics, and they also some very rich, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, Roman numerals after their name. And I found them. I found them to be the most anti-Semitic, not the kids that you talk about that come from the working class neighborhoods. But these people from rich homes with names like Webster and Palmer and Johnson, and I told my mother about it, and she couldn't believe it that was going on in West Hartford. I said, well, we grew up in a whole different neighborhood. This isn't that far away. And I'm curious if anybody else had interactions with students, non-Jewish students, that was really, this was, it wasn't just one word now and then. This was constant bullying.
I'm sorry you felt that way. I will say that in all the years I attended King Philip, I never experienced any anti-Semitism there.
I'm talking about Sedgwick.
Well, there were no Jews there. I mean, that's
exactly.
Part of the problem is education, and if you don't meet anybody who's Jewish, then your values are formed by maybe what your parents tell you or whatever. But I don't think every school was like that.
No.
And I don't think it's right to broad brush. And I don't think it's right to broad brush any particular group of people or any particular school with that. Anti-Semitism has been with us as long as we can remember.
But this made me like hell. This was every day. I'm talking about one school, Sedgwick, not broad brushing anything, and it was hellish. It was the worst time of my life. When you start to become an adult, middle school age, being high school age. So, I went from my whole world being Jewish, and we moved, and then it was my whole world. I was like the outcast.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. I'm going to move on to another question, but that itself really does tell you a little bit about the differences there could be within the town of West Hartford. Ruth Sion's had her hand up for a little bit. Go ahead.
I'm not denying what happened, but my grandfather actually built houses in restrictive covenants areas. We were at West Hartford Jewish Congregation, which became Beth David, and he used to play poker with the priest across the street. And what made him almost come to tears was that there was a synagogue and a church opposite each other, as there was in New Britain. And post-World War II, the anti-Semitism was just beginning to be reckoned with at a national level and at a local level. But I must say that what really changed my life, because I was totally immersed in Judaism, was Rabbi Kessler, who got us in LTF to realize that Blacks were treated the same way that Jews were. And at the time, there was, I think, one Black family in West Hartford Center. And it's still, even now with people on our Board of Education and our town council, Rabbi Kessler took us in his senior class in 1963 in August on that hot day on the train to the March on Washington. And it changed our lives because we realized that we weren't the only people in the world that were discriminated against. So there is a gift in being Jewish, which is overcoming and understanding and fighting discrimination of any kind. So I thank you for the opportunity to say that.
Thank you so much for saying that, Ruth.
Thank you. Thank you. That was great.
Sandy, you wanted to say something here?
I saw that Susan Viner had posed something about I'm changing the subject a little bit, but about the sororities that were evident in the Hartford area during our growing up years. And if I'm not mistaken, and I don't know if she was asking it as a question or not, one was Iota Phi, and I'm pretty sure the other one was Phi Delta. And then of course another it wasn't a sorority, but another big young women's group at that time was also BBG, the neighbor out of the old Jewish Center, which was on Asylum Avenue. It was a private home at one time and then converted to a Jewish center. And many of us spent a lot of nights there.
Yeah, somebody else had asked if anyone had memories of the JCC before it moved to West Hartford in the early 60s.
The other thing I would just like to mention is that I think those of us who were fortunate, grew up in West Hartford, had a tremendous opportunity to learn about being Jewish and the Jewish community. There were so many organizations, as there still are today, that young people can participate in and learn from. And that's what actually happened to me. My background was limited, and when I married into the Rolnick family, on my own, decided that I wanted to have a kosher home. I wanted to be involved. And for 50 years of any volunteer work I've done has always been through a Jewish organization. And lastly, and one of my favorites, of course, being the Historical Society. And one thing I've learned is that you can never know enough about your background and your history. And to this day, I'm sorry that I didn't question family members more about my background and about the history, but it's an organization that gives us all a great opportunity to learn about ourselves. And I did not get paid to make that plug.
Very nice plug. We're very lucky that Sandy has dedicated herself to the Historical Society and other Jewish organizations in her adult life. David Klah was asking if that there was maybe a third Jewish sorority during the 50s and wondered if anybody remembered the name. And I was curious, did the sororities exist through Hall High School or just through the JCC itself?
Don't forget about Weaver.
Weaver, but we're talking about West Hartford here, so yeah, that's what I'm curious about.
It's Bobby here about the sororities. The two sororities, Iota Phi and Phi Delta, were girls from both Hall and Weaver, which was a wonderful kind of a carryover. We all got to know each other from, Hartford and West Hartford. There was a third Jewish sorority. It was a smaller group, and I don't remember the name of it, but the whole sorority system was, I was very active in Iota Phi, and it was wonderful. I mean, friends and the whole thing. But once I got to college, no more sororities for me. That was, it was just too isolating.
Susan Goldberg.
So I have a challenge for everybody. Those of us who remember Keeney Park, and after shul on the high holidays, we would all go into Keeney Park, different synagogues. You didn't need to be at the same synagogue. Everybody would meet in Keeney Park. Well, it was something I really loved. And then it disappeared, after everybody would be in West Hartford at this synagogue or that synagogue, and you didn't have the coming together. But I felt it again. I felt it again when there was Israeli Independence Day celebrations at Camp Shalom. If any of you remember that, I think we even used to walk our way out there to Windsor to Camp Shalom. And all of a sudden, the whole Jewish community was there again together. I kind of miss that. Right now, everybody's in their own shul and their own place. There was something I thought very nice about the whole community or whoever wanted to be coming together, whether it was for children's activities or what. So I guess I'm putting a bug out there. If we could come up with some kind of a way of having a celebration outdoors, not indoors, and get the community together again. So anybody come up with it, I'll be happy to work on it with you.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Cindy again?
No, I'm giving
It's me
Marshall.
this time.
Marshall. Hi, Marshall.
Just continuing on what Susan said. I grew up before she did in the Hartford area. I lived on Woodland Street, 2 doors down from the Emmanuel. There were 3 U-shaped buildings, and we lived in the middle one. And so I was maybe less than a quarter of a mile to the entrance to Keeney Park, and also to the Emmanuel Synagogue where we belonged at that time. And Susan's not exaggerating. Everybody came from West Hartford, from New Britain, from wherever there were Jews. They came after the services to Keeney Park, and it was just amazing, absolutely amazing. And also, by the way, when I looked out my living room window, the buildings were U-shaped, as I said. If I looked out my living room window across the way to the people on the other side, through a courtyard, it was the Lear family whose son was Norman Lear.
Oh, yeah.
We're all talking, but the move of the JCC to West Hartford happened early. And did anybody have a reaction? Us old North Enders always talk about the JCC on an asylum, but there was generations of people who went to Bloomfield Avenue and technically West Hartford. Did anybody have any reactions there for meetings or sports or whatever?
What kind of reactions?
I think
Whatever.
the
Youth
JCC opened in, I believe, in 1962. So it's just a little bit after what we're talking about, but tonight. But it's definitely there's definitely a big move, of the Jewish community institutions into West Hartford and Bloomfield. Did anyone want to comment on that?
So David, what you're saying though, I have a wonderful memory of your wife, Bobby, directing the play I Never Saw Another Butterfly. So there were a lot of wonderful children's productions, but Bobby, that one was outstanding. It really, really was.
It's very meaningful to all of us who were involved. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I think we're a little bit over our time, so I'm going to wrap this up for tonight. And I really thank all 4 panelists for a very rich discussion with different perspectives on memories of growing up in this time. And we'll look forward to the time when we can get together in the way that Susan Goldberg is describing. Dan, did you want to say something? No, okay. I saw your hand up there. Okay. So thank you so much. And if you wanted to share this with anyone else, I'll send the link around to where the recording will be on our website.
Well done. Thank you, everybody. Enjoyed it very much.
Thank you. Very interesting.
And I wanted
This is great.
Night, everybody.
to thank the Noah Webster House for co-sponsoring with us.
See you.
Thank you.
Thanks again. Good night. Bye.
Are we all done?
Yeah, apparently.
Long live West Hartford.
That was excellent.
Very interesting.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Enjoy the snow. Spring is coming.
Elizabeth,
Yes.
it's Susan Namro. Susan
Hi.
Namro.
Hi.
Since we're at the end, but I noticed you said, I didn't realize Noah Webster was part of this.
Yeah.
A sponsorship, but what you might find interesting is my mom, we came to West Hartford in 1950. My father was transferred here for business and someone told him, don't buy in Hartford, buy in West Hartford. So he bought on Grizzle Drive. That's
Okay.
how I know Sandy. We were a block away.
Oh,
But
okay.
my mother wanted to assimilate to the community. And one of the things she did, besides American Jewish Congress, but she worked at the Noah Webster House. She volunteered.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, she did both because her goal was to assimilate into the community.
That's very interesting that would be a way to do it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, she wanted to do both. She didn't want to be just in one world.
Right, right. Great. Thanks for sharing
There's
that.
also
That's a good
Rabbi Feldman was very active in Project Concern.
Yeah.
And that was to bring the minorities from Hartford to West Hartford because of the school system being better here.
Right.
And at one point, he was told not to sit in his favorite chair with his shade up because he was a perfect target to be assassinated.
So Harriet, do you remember the Robbins family?
Do I remember who?
The Robbins family. I lived around the corner on Griswold and Middlebrook.
Oh, I do remember you. Yes. Where are
Yeah.
you living now? Are you still in West Hartford?
No, I'm in Avon.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Well,
And actually,
I'm a little further away. I'm in Boynton Beach.
Right.
So if people get down here, give me a call.
Okay.
It's a nice place. I was just there.
Well, you didn't come for dinner.
Well, my parents from Delray. I was visiting them.
Okay.
Who's
Thank you. Thank you
speaking with
so much,
parents
Harriet,
in
for
Delray?
joining us.
Good night. Bye.
Good night, everybody.
Who was speaking from Delray?
What's that?
Who was it who has parents in Delray?
David Silver.
Oh, okay,
I was just
David.
yeah. I was there a week ago. Where in Boynton are you?
Okay, I'm right on the Delray line. I'm between Jog and Military on Flavor Pick in Coral Lakes.
Okay, I know exactly where you are.
Well, give a call next time.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
We'll do.
Good night,
We'll do.
everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye. Stay well.
Thank you. Thank you again, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
This was a great session.
Very nice.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.